bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être là. C'est un moment excitant pour être en finance et on a deux leaders de la finance durable avec nous. Merci de nous faire ce grand plaisir. On a 45 minutes, on aura la chance, ils ont accepté de prendre les questions du public, donc vous pourrez préparer vos questions s'il y a des questions qui n'auront pas été posées. On va peut-être commencer tout de suite, peut-être avec vous, Monsieur Carney. Vous avez été une des personnes qui avait vraiment mené le cheval de bataille de la finance durable. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire pourquoi c'est si important pour vous et pourquoi ça vous a tenu à cœur à ce point-là?
Premièrement, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici au sommet de la finance durable, ici à Montréal, avec tous les experts à travers du Québec, à travers du Canada et en effet à travers du monde. Et il y a une décennie, j'étais gouverneur de la Banque d'Angleterre, j'étais en même temps le président du Conseil de la stabilité financière et les deux organisations commencent à réfléchir à la hauteur des risques liés ou associés avec le changement du climat. Un aspect clé. Le secteur financier international le plus grand du monde est en Angleterre. Le secteur d'assurance, le quatrième plus grand du monde, est à Londres. Et ce secteur devient de comprendre que l'événement extrême climatique a multiplié 3 fois pendant 2 décennies. Et les pertes assurées ont multiplié 8 fois. Alors, c'est un enjeu, un risque réel pour eux. Et on peut voir à ce moment-là que ce seront des risques à partout ou à travers le secteur financier. Et il faut agir, il faut changer les règles de jeu parce que les causes sont fondamentales de la nature du marché et de la nature humaine, en effet.
Monsieur Cormier, sous votre impulsion Desjardins aussi, ça vous tenait à cœur que vous vous positionniez comme un leader sur tout ce qui est le développement durable, les changements climatiques. Pourquoi c'est essentiel?
Écoutez, comme Marc, moi aussi, merci beaucoup de l'invitation. Très, très content d'être sur ce panel. Puis merci de votre présence, tout le monde. J'espère que n'hésitez pas dans les questions tantôt. Moi, je vous dirais, il y a vraiment 3 raisons. Ça fait 30 ans que je travaille chez Desjardins. Puis quand on regarde l'histoire de Desjardins, je vais remonter loin là, à Alphonse Desjardins. Mais le mouvement Desjardins, c'est une organisation qui a été créée pour lutter contre l'injustice sociale. C'était impossible pour des Canadiens français d'avoir accès à un compte, à une institution financière. Fait que cette dimension-là de justice sociale, d'engagement dans la société a toujours été importante pour une organisation comme Desjardins. Alors, moi qui ai grandi pendant 30 ans, on voit qu'aujourd'hui, évidemment, il y a 60 ans, la lutte au changement climatique, c'était pas la même chose qu'aujourd'hui, mais une organisation engagée comme la nôtre a le devoir de continuer d'exercer le même leadership que l'on exerce depuis les 123 ans de notre création. Quand je suis arrivé à la présidence en 2016, il commençait à y avoir des discussions, beaucoup aux États-Unis, à travers le monde, sur le capitalisme, besoin de renouveler. On voyait qu'il y avait comme des dommages collatéraux de ces 40 années-là. Puis là, je ne juge pas capitalisme, coopération, mais je dis juste que il y a vraiment des dommages collatéraux qu'on prend plus la mesure aujourd'hui qu'on n'avait peut-être pas dans les années 60, 70. Puis la troisième raison, c'est ce que Marc disait. Je veux dire, au Québec, souvent, les gens ils nous voient comme « Ah, vous faites des hypothèques ». Mais 50% des revenus de Desjardins viennent de nos activités d'assurance. Quand on a lancé la compagnie d'assurance auto-habitation de Desjardins dans les années 50-60, au départ, on assurait quoi? On assurait le feu. C'est le feu qu'on voulait protéger à travers le monde. C'est le feu qu'on voulait protéger, le feu des maisons. Aujourd'hui, c'est plus du feu qu'on protège. C'est des inondations. C'est des catastrophes naturelles. Puis là, on le voit encore. Alors, c'est vraiment ce sentiment-là. Puis ce que je me suis dit, c'est, avant de regarder à l'extérieur, essayons de travailler à l'interne. Fait que de 2017 à 2020, on a vraiment travaillé sur nos propres opérations. Puis là, on est vraiment dans un plan où on est beaucoup plus à l'externe pour tenter humblement d'influencer les parties prenantes avec qui on travaille.
Effectivement. Alors, on va passer en anglais. Il y a des traductions instantanées si vous avez besoin. But maybe, Mr. Cormier, you can keep going about this because one of the ways Desjardins is helping with this is being very innovative with the new products, financial products.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, yeah, I really think right now that we are in a moment where the financial industry can be more innovative because there's a pool of talent, a pool of capital, a pool of needs. So we just have to connect everyone. So what we're trying humbly to do at Desjardins is really to connect all the dots to be more innovative. And we maybe just three really pragmatical example. The one is a partnership that we did with EDC, Exportation Development Canada, to really invest $1 billion in the next 4 or 5 years with SMEs, essentially, not just big industries, but really SMEs, smaller companies, to really help them to transform their operations in a way where they'll reduce their emissions. So this is one aspect. The second aspect, we had the discussion before, is we just launched 2 months ago one of the first ESG swap in Canada. So this is a swap of interest rates. We're floating and fixed interest rates that we will have a contract with a company. But what's interesting is at the end of the contract, we will have, let's say, not even a reduction, but really we will reimburse a portion of our revenues depending of some specific KPI, ESG KPI about security of your employees, how much are you connected with the community, gas emission, et cetera, et cetera. And if the company really achieved the targets that we fixed together, we will reimburse and bring them back a cash money rebate or something like that. If the company doesn't really fulfill all the requirements that we decided altogether, they will have to pay to a ESG entity in their community.
Like a penalty?
Kind of, not a penalty. They will have to invest money, give a donation to this company because they haven't achieved the KPI that we fixed 5 years ago in the contract. Not only on the E, but also on the S or the governance sometimes. Could be a diversity of your board or management committee or stuff like that. So this is something that we launched, really proud of. And the third one is an Eastern Alliance that we just signed a deal, really interesting, last week about the Eastern Alliance to really build a wind farm here in Quebec, in Île-de-la-Madeleine, where more than 200 municipalities and one indigenous community will work together with a really creative financing product about $350 million financing project directly to the municipalities. So they'll own all the projects, 50% of ownership. So it's kind of a bridge during the time that we will finish the project and maybe have other more long-term emissions or issues. So I really feel right now, and there's more in the pipeline.
More coming out.
Coming out right now. I
we'll
don't
be
like
waiting.
to use this word, but
could be a hydrogen.
I feel right now that there's, like I said, pool of talent, pool of capital, pool of needs. So we're trying to do our best. Yeah.
I'll be curious what you think about financial innovation and how it can help us get towards our goals.
Sure, and let me pick up on a number of things that have just been said, and let me start with the purpose of le mouvement Desjardins to fight social injustice. And I think what we need to recognize is that what is happening is that because of the movement, because of youth, because of people in Quebec, across the world, people want climate change addressed. And it's that fact and that movement and that pressure which brings that objective into the center of finance. And it's the prospect of that getting more and more center stage and mainstreamed that means that finance can move. So there's a series of initiatives, and we've just heard a few, which are truly innovative. We should recognize that these are bridges to where we ultimately have to go. Because where we need to end up is that every decision takes climate change into account. It's not necessarily in a green bond or a ESG mortgage or this specific instrument. We need those today, to be absolutely clear. But it's in an everyday mortgage, an everyday loan, an everyday investment. And a lot of what is being done for the architecture of finance and why Montreal as a sustainable finance hub is so important, things like the ISSB and building out from that, is so that this all mainstreams. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of innovations, and I'll hand back. So with that overall context. First, what's absolutely critical is that we continue to innovate, and institutions like Desjardins innovate for the retail customer. In mortgages for small businesses and help them. Secondly, I'm going to speak on a broader scale, though. We need to get massive amounts of capital to where the emissions are to help get those emissions down. And in order to do that, we need to create a few new instruments. One, there's lots of discussion around carbon credits. In headlines and news articles, there's very little action in carbon credits. And the reason has been that there haven't been reliable standards monitoring the plumbing of those financial markets being in place. We have a chance in the next year, I would say, to put those in place at the global level and here in Canada. And we should take that because the time value of carbon is such. Our carbon budget is moving away very rapidly, and this is one way to extend it, and we need to extend it. There's other benefits. We can get into that. The third thing, and the last point I'll make, is we need to have a true market for transition finance. In other words, to judge those investments, those companies that are getting their emissions down and are moving from well off the path of 1.5 degrees to converging to that path, taking out emissions today for that. And that requires standards, that requires disclosure, but above all, it requires capital.
All right. Okay. What is the role of financial institutions toward, a transition to the real economy? We hear a lot about the real economy. What is the role of institutions? What do you think?
Shall I start? Yeah, I'll start. So, and it slightly picks up from where I left off, yes. Which is, I think our responsibility is there's a lot of and in this conversation, so we have to do multiple things. But let's focus on those high emission sectors. It could be in steel, aluminum, in heavy industry, power generation around the world, not here in Quebec, but around the world. And I'll give an example, if I may, from Brookfield. I'll try and keep it quick. We are in the process of taking over the largest generating company in Australia, power generation company in Australia. It is responsible for 7% of Australia's emissions. It produces electricity with coal. It buys in electricity from natural gas. It serves almost 5 million customers that way. It's a public company. We're paying a premium. We're going to take it private. We're going to invest $20 billion, and we're going to get rid of those emissions. Okay. Well, it ends up being, when you net out the supply chain, et cetera, something like 90% of those emissions. And we can do that because we have a longer time horizon than a shareholder who wants their dividends today. We can do that because we have expertise. We run 25 gigawatts of renewable power around the world, and we have access to supply chains. But we also have the conviction that in 5 years and 10 years' time, it is going to be a lot more valuable to be a utility that has low to no emissions, certainly better serve the people of Australia, and will be more highly valued in the market. So what do financial institutions need to do in various ways with respect to high emission entities is to go there, find out the ones who have a plan to get those down, judge whether those plans are credible, get capital behind it, and then track it. And you have to be, last point, you have to be very, very transparent about this. So it's not letting somebody off the hook. You have to hold yourself to account. So what we do, and this is my last point, is that we make a commitment that our investments will be Paris-aligned by the maturity of the fund. And that's measurable. It's disclosed to all our limited partners, our co-investors, who themselves, in many cases, have those commitments as well. So we're on the hook for delivering the actual decarbonization.
Mr. Cormier, what's your take on this?
I'll pick up on that because that's absolutely what we're doing. If it's on the financing side or if it's in the investment side, it's really to have a real discussion with the companies and the board of management and board of directors about, do you have a plan? Do you factor this risk in your operations? Yeah. And do you have targets? And actually, just last year, we had 101 meeting with board here in Canada about companies that we're investing or working with, and said, you know what, if you want us to continue to be on the table, just we hope or we want that you do this, do that. So the first thing I think that we can really influence is to stay at the table and have a real discussion about targets that we want them to achieve, the first one. The second one is Canada is a country of SMEs. We have more than 400,000 clients and members at Desjardins in Canada. Small, medium-sized companies. The corporations, the bigger one, they'll be able to have help to work that side. But the smaller one, they really need our help. Where do I start? How do I start? Well, who am I going to work with? So we have built internally a team, a ESG team, that is really pragmatic, proactive, and can really help and support a small company. Because maybe we'll say, oh, it's not a lot of emission for them. But at the end of the day, they're part of a supply chain of someone else. And at the end of the day, this big company will probably say, if you want to continue to be a supplier for me, you have to do this or do that. So that's why if we want to keep our economy as strong as it is right now, we really have to work on our SMEs. And the last one, not the less, is the fact that I think in the last decade, in many financial institutions, ESG, fight against climate change, was part of a specific department. Now what we have tried to do at Desjardins is last year we launched a mandatory training course for our 58,000 employees. How do I implement in the mindset of all of the employees ESG in their decision process, in their projects? This is not something that is on the side. It has to be part of our whole activities day after day. And this is quite a challenge.
You've talked about employees, but as a financial institution, you have a lot of influence, not only on the employees, but all around you.
Yeah.
How do you use that influence to mobilize, the stakeholders and partners toward those net zero objectives that you have?
Well, it's quite a challenge. For one reason, for us, we decided to stay at the table, like I said, be part of a fair transition. So the first thing is, like I said before, is to really have an open and frankly discussion with them. And there are some deals that we said we passed. And there are some deals in Canada we said we leave the table because it's been 4 years that we have this discussion with you and we don't feel that there's enough commitment, engagement, you're not enough serious. So we said we leave the table. So there's really some deals, and they find their money somewhere else, let's put it this way. But we don't want to be part of but our strategy is really to be around and really proactively help them to change. The second aspect about the stakeholders is we are investing a lot of money in research and development with universities, engineering universities. Here in Montreal, École de Technologie Supérieure, we invest in $1.5 million with them to try to work in the construction industry. The construction industry is an industry that is, a brick. You destroy walls right now. We destroy buildings. What do you do with all these things after? We do nothing right now. It's waste. So we're trying to influence in real estate, in infrastructure, with some specific projects to really build a strategy for the long term. So that's how we try to help as much as we can.
Well, Mr. Carney, your mobilization is clearly your strong suit. We've seen this in the last few years. Why is it so important? And how do you use that influence to get everyone around the table to change, to have real change?
Well, I think the first thing is just to go back that none of this change would be happening unless citizens and individuals wanted this change. And it's channeling that and continuing to have representatives and those stakeholders at the table that helps to push it. Secondly, I think we recognize, and Mr. Cormier just mentioned it, implied, these changes happen in communities. These are livelihoods. People have developed skills, they work for companies, and there's, in some cases, fairly dramatic change. And quite often it's geographically concentrated. So you have to start early. You have to prepare. You have to have, it's as important to finance the orderly wind down of a business and an industry as it is to finance the replacement, the new industries. And of course, skills training, research development, adjustment, working with partners, including governments, is absolutely essential. So I think there's, to go back to your question, there's several aspects of mobilization. There's mobilization of all the stakeholders, which is the core of it. There's mobilization within the financial sector itself, this is what this summit is about: is organizing the financial sector for the real economy. Some of that mobilization is incredibly, unless you're a financier, it's incredibly dull and boring, but absolutely essential.
We find it exciting, don't
we? Thank you. Good. I'm glad. Hopefully everyone, hands up, everyone finds it exciting. That's good. Because it's plumbing, it's disclosure, it's central counterparties, it's how you structure the ISDA agreement for your ESG swap. It's these types of things, and it's getting things standardized. What's critical with the mobilization, of course, is the ability to scale rapidly. We want to create templates that scale rapidly, and we have to be a bit careful. The best can often be the enemy of the good. Sometimes the absolute perfect, tailor-made structure can only be done once. Now, it's probably outside of the conversation we're going to have today, because I think rightly we're focused on what's happening here in Quebec, here in Canada. But I will tell you that one of the biggest issues, and what takes up a lot of my time now, is at an international level. Financing for the transition in the emerging and developing world. These problems are legion. Everything is one-off. Everything is stretched. What the World Bank does is measured in tens of millions of dollars when it needs to be measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. And so redesigning the core of that system, mobilizing all the stakeholders at the international level so that we can change it. That's the third mobilization, if you will, and that's taking a lot of time. And because I'm more and more comfortable that this is in good hands
of course Canada. It is. I'm sure it is. Just to be clear, yes, of course, we're interested in Quebec and Canada because that's where we are. But you're clearly here to tell us also what's around the world, because let's be clear, capital is flowing all around the world.
Can I hit a couple of points then quickly? Yes. What's crucial, and they will reverberate here. One of the biggest issues around the world is, what is a credible transition plan? That's come up a few times. That's what you do when you sit around the table. That's how you make judgments about allocating capital. That's what we look for at Brookfield when we're putting capital out. But actually standardizing that approach, GFANZ, which I co-chair with Mike Bloomberg, which is, just to be clear, it's 40% of global private financial assets are the balance sheets there. And we have developed a framework of what we want to see from businesses for a good transition plan, including the orderly phase out of what will ultimately be stranded assets, what we want to see, how we should report that, and what our plans should look like and what our disclosure should be. On top of that, and I know you've rightly emphasized in other settings, accountability and transparency, we are building a single open source data public utility so that everybody, not just the finance geeks and the finance geeks, but everybody.
That's you, by the way.
I wasn't looking. I don't know why I looked at you. Me. If I could look at myself.
Are you looking at
someone else? Yeah, exactly.
I think I was looking toward you.
But all the stakeholders can see what bank X or insurance company Y or asset manager Z is doing, what their financed emissions are, what their targets are, and what progress they're making against their targets. And then making judgments about who's doing well, who isn't. And maybe actually if a whole country isn't doing well, their financial institutions, is the issue with the government. So those are some of the big issues. The last big issue, which I alluded to, is I think this year and this COP is a unique opportunity to change how the multilateral development banks are functioning, their ability to crowd in private capital into the transition in the emerging world, and associated with that is whether or not carbon credit markets will play a role in supplementing that. So lots going on.
You've both said that your strategy, the one you prefer, is to stay at the table. But there is a lot of debate and a lot of people who say it's better to leave the table rather than stay and influence, carbon-heavy industries. What do you tell those people who would rather see you leave that table?
Well, it's not. We can do both. We can do both. There is some industries that we said we're leaving the table. The thermal coal industry, Desjardins, for the last few years, we're no more investing there. Since 2017, we don't invest in building pipelines in Canada. That's what we have decided to do. So there's real entities and activities that we said we don't want to be at the table no more. But at the same time, if everyone at the same time decide to leave the table, this is real jobs right now. This is real communities. This is real people. So we feel that it's better to stay at the table when we have someone that is, or a company that is serious, have a plan. We feel that there's a transparency. And let's put it this way, we invest more and more in bigger companies, huge companies, with different kind of operations, diversify operations. It's really difficult for a financial institution to have all the details of all the operations in all of the companies that we invest. And I will always have someone who will say, yeah, you invest money in this company, but they have done this. Yes, but it's part of big operations. So where do you start the definition of the greenwashing? Where do you stop the definition? So, but yes, I think we should, and we are doing both. We leave the table sometimes, and we are at the table when we feel that there's a pathway, there's a real change that is happening right now, and we are influencing them really positively.
Yeah, if I may, I mean, again, it's well said. A couple supplementary comments. One is, it's clear we're in a crisis, right? We're in the climate crisis. And my experience in various crises I've been in is, as Tim Geithner used to say, plan beats no plan. You have to have a plan in the climate crisis. If you're a financial institution, we have plans. This room, I think, has plans. And the companies that we invest in or lend to, they have to have a plan. They have to have a plan consistent not where they start, but where they need to go. If they have a credible plan, we should, as an institution, we as a financial system as a whole, we shouldn't walk away from that plan. But companies are on notice that they need to have a plan that's consistent with the transition. It is the law of the land in this country that we will get to net zero by 2050. There is no excuse for not developing that plan. And there is a responsibility to go back to the 400,000 small, medium enterprises in the country. There's a responsibility to work with your supply chain. Up and down your value chain to help those enterprises. Because actually, when you look at your emissions, depends who you are, but in many cases, the most efficient way of getting down your overall emissions is actually going to be others that are part of your value chain. So I think that's the essence of what we're looking for. That's where the system is going, and that's where we need capital to flow.
There's carbon-heavy industry, and then there's fossil fuel industry. So the product itself will not get greener, not by much. Do you still think that we should invest in fossil fuel? Well,
it holds what I just said holds for the energy companies, for the fossil fuel companies. Look, the IEA 1.5 degree scenario, so what we're all shooting for, has the following path of investment consistent with it, which is that right now, the investment of clean energy, dollar value in clean energy should be roughly equal to the dollar value investment in fossil fuels. Okay, so not zero, but roughly equal because of decline rates in existing fields and maintenance and things like that. By the way, 7 years ago at the Paris Accord, that ratio was 0.5. Now it's 1-to-1. This year, actually, it's on course to be about 1.6, 1.7 to 1. Okay, so you're seeing the parabolic increase in clean energy, which is great. By the end of this decade, according to the IEA, that number, or that ratio rather, should be about 4-to-1, 4 to 5-to-1. Two things. One is it's not 4 to 5 to 0. 4 to 5 to 1. So there still is some residual investment in oil and gas, fossil fuel related, because we have an energy system globally that is 80% driven by that, and you can't switch it off overnight. But the key thing is the ramp up towards that top number. I think the challenge for the energy sector and the challenge for the oil and gas companies is, are they moving at that speed? Are they moving towards that ratio? Or are they, and at present, I will tell you that the best in the energy sector are about 0.3 to 1, and I'm probably being a bit generous there. So that tells you that the answer for the transition is largely coming from outside of that sector. There's still a chance to have a plan, but you need to have a plan to be backed.
You've said it, we're in a crisis, but in every crisis, as everyone knows here, there's an opportunity. What are the best opportunities right now in the transition economy?
I think they come in several ways. One is just the sheer orders of magnitude, $3 trillion of incremental investment globally required for the energy transition every year. $2 trillion in total in Canada, again, just for the energy transition in the next 25 years. So these orders of magnitude are huge in any room with any institution or any group of institutions, first thing. Secondly, what we're seeing, and we, in our view, my view, we will see more of, is that valuation is starting to take into account carbon today and carbon tomorrow for a company. So are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution, becoming part of the solution? So you're going to get a return, just like that you get a return on carbon, but you get a financial return which comes from backing the right. And I think the third thing, which is tougher to put a number on, and I wouldn't today, but is that, and it goes back to the broader social justice point, is that there is an opportunity to align what we're doing on climate, in many cases, to broader social goals, nature, biodiversity, building communities, building diversity alongside the broader, I'll call it the ESG agenda, but that's not fully doing it justice. And so those opportunities should become increasingly apparent and add to the return on investment in all senses of the word.
Mr. Cormier, what do you think are the best opportunities right now?
I'll start really on a broader scale. Well, the opportunity is really to, I'll say, save the world, but there's no planet B here. There is no planet B. So the opportunity at the end of the day is really to save the world that we live in right now. And we understand very well, when you look at the next 50, 100 years, 150 years, without being apocalyptic, but the fact is that the opportunity is really to the kind of communities we want to live in, the one of society we want to live in. So I think on that note, we all have to push in the same direction. And I see a huge difference in the financial industry. And thanks to Mark and everything that he have accomplished and many players around the globe. But 2000 to 2020 and 2020 to 2023, huge difference about the momentum, about the transparency. I'll use the word, or the real engagement. I see a huge difference. So is there a lot of work to do and room to? Yes, but I really feel that we're heading in the right direction. The second aspect, on a really basic level, is really circular economy. We have built a world in the last 40 years, really a supply chain that is really more global. I think with the pandemic, we have learned that sometimes it could be interesting to have really friendshoring, let's put it this way, or really a circular economy where we feel that the waste of one company is is part of the production of a new company. I feel that there's an opportunity that 3% of Quebec GDP, 3% of Quebec, just Quebec GDP, is in circular economy. There's a huge opportunity there to really rethink of the supply chain and the way we supply our companies, just by being more local sometimes and having less impact on the gas emission around the globe.
Yeah, so circular economy, if you have to invest in something when you go back to the office today. Yeah. All right. So you both mentioned climate social justice, and it's strongly related to climate change. So fighting climate change is going to really help with social justice. And we know today that developing countries are going to be the ones suffering more, yet they're less responsible for carbon emissions. how can finance help with that issue? It's a more global thing, but I'm sure Cormier has an opinion on that too.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll start and pass on. But first, that's absolutely right. The historic emissions. The UK, for example, is the second largest historic emitter still of carbon. So there is a differentiated responsibility, and that should be recognized. First point. Secondly, there are huge challenges in getting the adequate financing flows to much of the emerging and developing world. China basically self-financing and able to largely finance their transition, so it's not an issue for them. Probably tipping point in that direction for India as well, and there'll be cross-border flows, but not. But then other major emerging economies, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Africa, not able to, and then fully finance, and then the developing world. So we have a responsibility. As well, much of the capital cost of renewables relates to financing. Financing, large financing differentials are material to the levelized cost of new renewables, and much of the energy systems in these countries is relatively young thermal coal generation. So there is a cost to shutting those down. Somebody has to bear the cost of shutting those down. Someone has to bear some of the cost of buying down the financing costs. And thirdly, making financing available for the broader developing economies. And that's what's necessary to happen at one level with the resources. We need to the punchline is we need to use limited public resources that are in the multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank. We need to use them to maximum effect. And the way to use them to maximum effect is going to be to make greater use of guarantees, of first loss structures, that a project preparation risk, taking earlier stage risks, and then leveraging on top of that private capital. And there are a variety of initiatives that are just starting to really get traction around this, and a series of events over the course of this year. And just to map them out, there's a summit in Paris in June. The President Macron and Prime Minister Motley are hosting. There is the UN gathering in September, the IMF World Bank meetings in October, and then COP28 in November, December. And we're working towards trying to make a material difference on this issue. It won't all be solved, but a material difference on this issue, and fairly radically have shifted how these institutions operate by the end of this year. Last point, if I may. One of the issues, and can you give me a minute to make this point?
I think it's important. Yes, we'll take that.
Go ahead, I'll make a quick point, which is I've mentioned carbon credits a couple of times. One of the core issues here is that what those represent, done properly, are financial flows from companies, some of the richest companies in the world, located in Canada, elsewhere around the world, to projects and decarbonization in some of the poorest countries in the world. The vast, vast majority of those flows will go from north to south. And structured properly, they can benefit nature, benefit indigenous peoples, help with this real challenge of shutting down young coal, if I can put it that way. They can actually bridge the gap and make that economic if we set these markets up properly. And they also help with a smoother transition here. So that is a big component that may or may not happen. I think it can happen, but and if it does happen, will be decisive.
On a totally different note, because
and you do have very different.
But that's the point. And I could have an answer of 5-10 minutes on that one, because seriously, this is a really important one. But we launched a division at Desjardins, Développement International Desjardins, 50 years ago in 1970. At that time, it was to use all the experience of Desjardins and go in different countries around the globe to really help them about financial literacy and how self-help them in different countries. Now we have been involved in more than 30 countries in South Asia, Africa, and South America. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we have changed a bit, not a bit, but a lot of our engagement with them about climate change. So really, smaller companies, how can we help them about wind farm, bring all the knowledge that we have here, the innovation that we have here, over there with governments, officials, and in these around 30 countries, how can we implement new innovative financial products? So it could be in Mali, it could be in South America, that we can bring all the knowledge, Desjardins knowledge, in really small communities to really start over there. I was discussing about circular economy at that time. So on a different level, but I think that many financial institutions can do that, and or just bridge or pool, and that's something that we do at Desjardins, and we are really involved now in many of these countries about farmers who want to change their production as a co-op movement, or these kind of activities. That's what we're trying to do. Try to bring what we have learned here in Canada, and as a co-op for more than a century, try to help them to fight climate change.
Thank you so much. That was all the time we had. Please give them a big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you.